met 100 women, but fell in love at first sight with a poor flower seller. A story of true love. Dawn crept over Jackson Heights like watercolor bleeding across paper, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Mariah Ellis stood at her flower stand, arranging tulips by color as the first hints of autumn's chill danced through the air. Her fingers, already familiar with the morning's cold, moved with practiced grace, each stem finding its place in the careful gradient she created. The ritual was more than organization, it was meditation. In these quiet moments before the city fully awakened, she could almost forget about the stack of medical bills waiting at home, or the way her mother's cough had grown deeper over the past week. Almost. A breeze caught the edge of her floral headscarf, and she adjusted it with the same instinctive care she gave her flowers. The fabric, a thrifted treasure in shades of marigold and burgundy, matched the chrysanthemums that would arrive later that afternoon. Mariah believed in these small harmonies, these tiny ways of making the world feel more intentional. Her phone buzzed. Nia's morning check-in. "Mom's meds are on the kitchen counter," her sister's text read. "Made her drink the gross tea, too. You can stop worrying for like 5 minutes, maybe." Mariah smiled, typing back a quick heart emoji. Nia tried so hard to sound casual, but concern threaded through her words like a thin silver wire. At 19, her baby sister shouldn't have to shoulder such responsibility, but here they were, making the best of what life handed them. The first customers of the day began trickling past her corner, regulars mostly, their faces as familiar as the changing seasons. Mrs. Rodriguez from the bakery 2 blocks down, buying her weekly bouquet of white carnations. The young lawyer who always chose the brightest sunflowers, claiming they helped him face morning court sessions. Each transaction was accompanied by snippets of conversation, weather observations, gentle inquiries about family. This was her world, small, contained, carefully tended. Like the urban gardens she dreamed of creating someday, when the bills were paid and her mother's health stabilized, when Nia could pursue her design dreams without guilt, when the morning light strengthened, catching the small gold lotus tattooed on her wrist. Some days she barely noticed it anymore, but today it seemed to shimmer, reminding her of why she'd chosen that symbol: beauty rising from muddy waters, strength born of necessity. She was reorganizing the daisies. They always sold better when arranged in perfect circles, when an unfamiliar shadow fell across her display. Looking up, Mariah found herself meeting a pair of grey-green eyes that seemed to hold all the morning's mist within them. The man stood just beyond her usual customer line, tall enough that he appeared to be ducking slightly, as if apologizing for taking up so much space. His cardigan was the color of coffee with too much cream, and he held a well-worn book in hands that looked more suited to turning pages than shaking hands in boardrooms. He started, then stopped, glancing at the flowers as if they might help him find his words. "Do you have anything that says, 'I'm sorry I'm terrible at being a person'?" The question startled a laugh from her. It wasn't the usual request for anniversary arrangements or sympathy bouquets. "That's specific," she said, studying him more carefully, "and probably needs more context." He ran a hand through his slightly wavy hair, managing to make it look both more and less disheveled. "I missed my friend's book reading. 3rd time I've cancelled on her this month. I keep getting caught up in my head and—" He gestured vaguely at nothing in particular. Mariah found herself nodding. She recognized that gesture, that attempt to explain the unexplainable weight that sometimes made simple things feel impossible. Moving with purpose, she began selecting flowers: dark purple iris for wisdom, pink ranunculus for admitting mistakes, white lisianthus for sincerity. "These," she said, beginning to arrange them, "say I'm human, I'm learning, and I value you." Her fingers worked quickly, adding sprigs of eucalyptus for balance and texture, more honest than just, "Sorry, don't you think?" He watched her work with an intensity that should have made her uncomfortable, but somehow didn't. There was nothing demanding in his gaze, only genuine interest and something that might have been recognition of a kindred spirit. "I'm Desmond," he offered, still watching her hands move among the flowers. "Mariah." She tied off the arrangement with a length of ivory ribbon, then hesitated before adding a single stem of blue delphinium, for lightness, for possibility. When she handed him the bouquet, their fingers brushed briefly. The touch was nothing, less than nothing, but for a moment, the whole world seemed to hold its breath. It was like finding a perfect line of poetry in an unexpected place, or hearing the exact song you needed without knowing you needed it. Then a taxi horn blared, and the spell broke. Desmond fumbled with his wallet, paid, and took a half-step back. "These are perfect," he said softly. "Thank you for understanding what I couldn't quite say." Mariah nodded, already turning to help another customer who'd approached. But she felt his presence lingering for a moment longer, like the afterimage of sunlight when you close your eyes. Later, as morning mellowed into afternoon, she found herself absently touching the lotus on her wrist. The day continued its usual rhythm, restocking roses, calling the wholesale supplier about next week's delivery, texting Nia reminders about their mother's afternoon medication. But something felt different, as if the air itself had shifted slightly on its axis. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was her mother. "Baby, you should see these beautiful birds outside my window," the text read. "Sometimes the smallest things carry the biggest messages." Mariah looked at the message for a long moment, then at the empty space where Desmond had stood. The morning sun had fully risen now, painting her little corner of Jackson Heights in shades of possibility. She bit her lower lip, a nervous habit she'd never quite broken, and began rearranging her tulips again. Some people arrange their lives like her flowers, all the same colors safely together, no surprises, no risks. But the most beautiful bouquets, she knew, were often the unexpected combinations, the ones that shouldn't work, but somehow did. She pushed the thought away and focused on the tasks at hand. There were orders to fill, customers to help, real-world problems that needed real-world solutions. She couldn't afford to get lost in maybes and might-bes, but every now and then, throughout the day, her eyes drifted to the spot where he'd stood, and she wondered if he'd found the right words to go with her flowers, if his friend had understood, if he'd come back. The lotus on her wrist caught the light again, and this time she let herself smile. After all, even flowers that grew from mud needed to believe in sunshine. Mariah's notebook lay open on her small kitchen table, its pages illuminated by the soft glow of her phone's flashlight. The apartment was quiet except for the distant hum of the building's ancient heating system and her mother's gentle breathing from the next room. These stolen moments between midnight and dawn were hers alone, when she could let her guard down enough to write. In the space between thorns and petals, where beauty learns to breathe, I plant my fears like seeds and watch them grow into possibilities. She crossed out the last line, chewing absently on her pen cap. The words felt too hopeful, too exposed. Her poetry had always been her secret garden, a place where she could be messy and uncertain without consequences. But lately, her verses kept circling back to that morning at the flower stand, to grey-green eyes and gentle uncertainty. A floorboard creaked behind her. Mariah snapped the notebook shut, but not fast enough. "You still writing your flower poems?" Nia stood in the doorway, wearing an oversized band t-shirt and judgmental expression. "Thais thought you gave that up after the whole college thing." "Shouldn't you be sleeping?" Mariah deflected, sliding the notebook under a stack of bills. "You have that design portfolio review tomorrow." "Today, technically." Nia dropped into the chair across from her sister, stealing a sip from Mariah's cold tea. "And don't change the subject. You've been different lately. Ever since that guy with the sad eyes started showing up at your stand." Heat crept up Mariah's neck. Desmond had returned 3 times since that first morning, each visit stretching a little longer than the last. They talked about everything and nothing, his favorite authors, her knowledge of flower symbolism, their shared love of rainy days and vinyl records. But she hadn't told anyone about these conversations, not even in her journal. "He's just a customer," she said, reaching for her tea but finding the cup empty, "like Mrs. Rodriguez or the sunflower lawyer." "Really?" Nia raised an eyebrow. "Because Mrs. Rodriguez doesn't make you smile like that, and she definitely doesn't bring you books about urban gardening." The book in question sat on their windowsill, its pages already dog-eared and marked with sticky notes. Desmond had brought it yesterday, claiming he'd found it at a used bookstore and thought of her dream to start a community garden. "It's called Being Friendly," Mariah insisted, but even she could hear the defensive note in her voice. "Good customer service." Nia stretched, her joints popping. That's why you've been color-coding the flowers differently. Adding all those blue ones he likes. Before Mariah could respond, a harsh cough echoed from their mother's room. Both sisters tensed, listening intently until the sound subsided. The moment of levity evaporated like morning dew. "Bills came today," Nia said quietly. "The new treatment isn't covered by insurance." Reality crashed back in, heavy as storm clouds. Mariah pushed away from the table, needing to move, to do something. She began organizing their small kitchen, putting away dishes that were already clean, straightening items that didn't need straightening. "I'll figure it out," she said, more to herself than to Nia. "Maybe we can get on a payment plan, or you could accept help sometimes." Nia's voice was uncharacteristically gentle, like when people offer to connect you with actual flower shops that could stock your arrangements. Mariah's hands stilled on a coffee mug. I can't take risks right now. The stand is stable, safe." "Nothing's really safe," Nia countered, "but some risks are worth taking." Another cough from their mother's room sent Nia hurrying to check on her, leaving Mariah alone with her thoughts and half-written poems. She pulled out her phone, opening the photos she'd taken of today's arrangements. Among them was one Desmond had helped her design, suggesting combinations she wouldn't have considered. Blues and yellows dancing together like sun and sky. The notification light blinked. A text from the medical billing office about a missed payment. Mariah closed her eyes, breathing in deeply. The scent of the day's leftover flowers drifted from her clothes, roses and eucalyptus, earth and possibility. When she opened her eyes, she saw her reflection in the dark window, a woman caught between duty and dreams, responsibility and possibility. The lotus on her wrist seemed to pulse with her heartbeat. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was an email from Desmond. "Found this article about successful urban garden projects in Queens," it read. "Thought it might interest you. Also, the book I brought made me think of another one you might like. I could bring it by tomorrow. No pressure." Mariah's fingers hovered over the keyboard. She should focus on the bills, on her mother's treatment, on Nia's education, on all the solid, tangible problems that needed solving. Instead, she found herself typing, "No, tomorrow works. Bring coffee." The response came quickly. "Only if you'll finally tell me why you arranged the tulips in perfect circles." A smile tugged at her lips despite everything. She glanced at her notebook, at the hidden poems that had started to feel less like secrets and more like seeds waiting to sprout. From her mother's room, she heard Nia's voice softly singing their mom back to sleep. An old lullaby about gardens growing in concrete, about flowers finding light through cracks in the sidewalk. The same song their mother used to sing to them. Mariah picked up her pen again, turning to a fresh page in her notebook. This time, she didn't cross out the hopeful lines. "Between concrete and sky, between duty and dreams, I plant these words like seeds and trust them to grow. Morning would come soon enough, bringing with it all the weight of reality. But for now, in these quiet hours, she let herself believe in possibilities, in unexpected combinations, in flowers that grew through cracks in carefully constructed walls." Her phone lit up one more time. Another email from Desmond. "By the way, my friend loved your... I'm sorry I'm terrible at being a person bouquet. Said it was the most honest apology she'd ever received. You have a gift for saying things without words." Mariah touched the lotus on her wrist, remembering the way he'd watched her arrange those flowers, seeing not just what they were, but what they could mean, what they could say. Maybe Nia was right. Maybe some risks were worth taking. Maybe the scariest seeds could grow into the most beautiful gardens. She just had to find the courage to plant them. The emergency room's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across Mariah's face as she paced the waiting area, her boots wearing an invisible path in the linoleum floor. Her mother's cough had turned violent in the early hours of the morning, each breath a battle that left both of them terrified. Now, watching through the narrow window of the treatment room, Mariah could only see fragments: the curve of her mother's shoulder, the gentle rise and fall of the hospital blanket, the steady blinking of monitors. Nia sat inside, headphones around her neck, holding their mother's hand and trying to look braver than her 19 years. Mariah's phone buzzed, the flower supplier, wondering why she hadn't picked up today's delivery. Reality crashed back in, She'd left everything at the stand when the ambulance came. The morning's arrangements, half-completed orders, a copy of the urban gardening book Desmond had lent her. Her fingers trembled as she typed a response, explaining the situation and asking for patience. The supplier had always been kind, but kindness didn't pay bills, and now there would be new bills, emergency room bills, on top of everything else. "Excuse me, miss," a nurse approached, clipboard in hand. "We need to discuss the admission paperwork and payment options." Mariah closed her eyes briefly, touching the lotus on her wrist. When she opened them, her voice was steady. "Of course, whatever she needs." The next hour dissolved into a blur of forms and signatures, each one feeling like another stone added to the weight she already carried. When she finally emerged from the administrative office, her head was spinning with numbers and terms and payment plans that seemed impossible. She nearly collided with someone in the hallway, someone tall, wearing a familiar coffee-colored cardigan. "Desmond?" Her voice came out rough with surprise and exhaustion. He stood there holding 2 paper cups, concern etched across his features. "Nia called the stand when she couldn't reach you. The number was on your business card." He held out one of the cups. "I thought you might need this." The coffee's warmth seeped through the cup into her cold fingers. Such a small thing, but it nearly undid her. She bit her lip hard, fighting back tears she couldn't afford to shed. "They want to keep her overnight," she said, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "For observation. Her oxygen levels." She trailed off, taking a sip of coffee to hide the tremor in her voice. "Can I help?" he asked simply. No platitudes, no empty reassurances, just a quiet offer. "I need to get back to the stand," she said. "There are orders I have to fill, deliveries, I'll handle it." "You don't even know, so teach me." His eyes held hers, steady and sure. "You can call the shots from here. Tell me exactly what needs to be done. I may not know flowers like you do, but I can follow instructions." A protest rose to her lips, but Nia appeared in the doorway of their mother's room. "Mom's asking for you," she said to Mariah, then noticed Desmond. Something in her expression softened. "Oh good, you found her." Mariah looked between them, her sister's tired face, Desmond's quiet presence, her mother waiting in the room beyond. The walls she'd built so carefully around her life were cracking, letting people in whether she was ready or not. "The purple irises go on the left side of the display," she found herself saying. "There's a notebook under the counter, with all the orders written down. The roses need to be trimmed at a 45-degree angle before—" "Mariah?" Desmond's voice was gentle. "Go be with your mum. I'll text if I have questions." She nodded, unable to find more words. As she turned toward her mother's room, she heard Nia speaking quietly to Desmond, giving him her number just in case. The hospital room was dimly lit, machines casting a blue glow over her mother's face. Despite everything, Gloria Ellis managed to smile when Mariah entered. "There's my flower girl." "Mama!" Mariah took her mother's hand, careful of the IV line. "You scared us. Just needed to remind you both that you can't handle everything alone." Her mother's voice was weak, but carried that familiar note of wisdom that had guided them through so many storms. "Sometimes we need to let people help tend our gardens." Mariah wondered if Nia had told their mother about Desmond, about how he'd been slowly becoming part of their world, but before she could ask, her phone buzzed with a photo message. Desmond had sent a picture of the stand, asking if the morning's arrangements looked right. They did. Somehow, he'd captured the essence of her style, while adding subtle touches of his own, blues and purples woven together like poetry. "He has a good eye," her mother said, looking at the photo over Mariah's shoulder, "and a kind heart." "Mama, it's not, it's whatever it needs to be, baby." Gloria squeezed her daughter's hand. "No more, no less. Like watching flowers grow, you can't force it, but you can create the right conditions." Throughout the day, Desmond sent updates and questions. Each message was thoughtful, showing attention to detail that surprised her. He remembered Mrs. Rodriguez's weekly carnations, made sure the sunflower lawyer got his usual arrangement. By evening, when the doctor came to report that Gloria's condition had stabilized, Mariah felt something shift inside her. The weight hadn't lifted. It was still there, heavy and real, but somehow it felt more bearable, shared between more shoulders than just her own. Nia had gone home to rest, promising to return with fresh clothes for their mother. In the quiet of the hospital room, Mariah finally opened her notebook, letting the day's emotions flow onto the page. We grow like wildflowers, through cracks in careful plans, finding light in unexpected places, learning to trust more than our own hands. Her phone buzzed one last time. Another photo from Desmond. The stand closed up for the night, everything neat and ordered. "Your garden's safe," he wrote. Get some rest." Mariah looked at her sleeping mother, at the lotus on her wrist, at the words in her notebook. Today had brought storms she hadn't been prepared for, but it had also brought something else. Proof that sometimes the most beautiful growth happened when plans fell apart. She typed back a simple, "Thank you," knowing the words weren't enough, but hoping he could read what lay beneath them, like finding meaning in a carefully arranged bouquet. Outside the hospital window, the city lights twinkled like stars, reminding her that even in the darkest nights, there was always light to be found. Sometimes you just had to let someone else help you look for it. Desmond's apartment was a study in controlled chaos. Books lined every available surface, arranged in a system only he understood. Poetry next to gardening guides, novels stacked by emotional resonance rather than author. The morning light filtered through his vinyl collection, casting rainbow shadows across the hardwood floor. He sat at his desk, staring at the blank document on his laptop. The cursor blinked accusingly, reminding him of all the words he hadn't written. His literary agency expected a reader's report on 3 manuscripts by tomorrow, but his thoughts kept drifting to the flower stand on the corner, to hands that spoke through petals and leaves. His phone chimed with a message from his former fiancée. "Saw your name on a book jacket yesterday," Camille wrote, finally working as an agent instead of just reading for them. The familiar twist of shame tightened in his chest. He'd promised her so many things, a partnership at the agency, a house in the suburbs, a life that looked good on paper. But when the moment came to step into that future, he'd frozen, overwhelmed by the certainty that he wasn't enough, would never be enough. Instead of responding, he pulled up the photos he'd taken at Mariah's stand yesterday, the arrangements he'd helped with, trying to channel her eye for beauty and meaning. He hadn't told her about his past, about how he'd let fear corrupt something that should have been beautiful. His phone rang. His sister Olivia, right on schedule. "Say, have you eaten today?" she asked without preamble. "And coffee doesn't count as food." "I'm fine, Liv." He got up, pacing between the bookshelves, actually working on something important. A real manuscript or another study of contemporary urban flora. The air quotes were audible in her voice. "Desi, you've been hanging around that flower stand for weeks. Either ask her out properly or find a new coffee route." "It's not—" He stopped, running a hand through his hair. "She's dealing with a lot right now. Her mother's in the hospital. And you're helping with her stand." Olivia's voice softened. "Mom told me. She says you actually smiled during Sunday dinner when you talked about it." Desmond looked at his reflection in the window, at the slight curve of his lips he hadn't noticed. "I like being useful," he said quietly. "With the flowers, everything means something. It's clear, simple. Unlike walking away from your engagement 2 weeks before the wedding." The words hit like a physical blow. Desmond sank onto his couch, surrounded by the books he used as shields. "Liv, I'm not judging," his sister said quickly. "What you did with Camille, it was messy and painful, but it was honest. You knew it wasn't right. You just never told anyone why, because the truth felt too small, too selfish." How could he explain that the perfect future Camille planned filled him with quiet desperation? That he'd rather read about lives than live his own? That he'd spent so long being what other people needed that he'd forgotten how to be anything else? His phone buzzed with another message, this time from Mariah. "Mom's being discharged tomorrow. Thank you again for yesterday, for everything." Attached was a photo of a small purple flower growing through a crack in the hospital sidewalk. The sight of it made his chest ache with something that felt like recognition. "Des, you still there?" Olivia's voice brought him back. "I need to go," he said, already reaching for his keys. "There's something I have to do." He heard his sister's knowing smile. "Go get 'em, little brother." The trip to the hospital took 20 minutes by subway. He spent it writing in the small notebook he always carried. Not client notes or manuscript critiques, but the kind of truth he usually kept buried. He found Mariah in the hospital garden, sitting on a bench with her notebook open. She looked up as he approached, and something in her expression made his carefully planned words evaporate. Instead, he held out his notebook, opened to today's page. "I think you should read this." She took it, brow furrowing as she read, "I left a perfect future at the altar because I was afraid of disappearing into someone else's story. Now I haunt bookstore aisles and flower stands on corners, looking for a plot twist I can believe in." When she looked up, her eyes were soft with understanding. "You write too, not like you do." He sat beside her, leaving space between them. "Your poems grow like your flowers, natural, meaningful. Mine are just honest," she finished. "They're honest." A comfortable silence settled around them, broken only by the distant sounds of the city and the rustle of pages as she read more of his clumsy attempts at verse. He watched her hands, the way they treated his words as carefully as they handled delicate blooms. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked finally. "Because you trusted me with your flowers." He met her eyes. "Fasten, and because I'm tired of being careful with the wrong things." She closed the notebook, running her fingers over its worn cover. "I have to pick up Mom tomorrow morning. The doctors say she needs more rest, better care. The bills." She trailed off, touching the lotus on her wrist. "Let me help," he said. "Not with money. I know you wouldn't accept that. But with the stand, with deliveries, whatever you need." "Why?" The question hung between them, heavy with all the weight of past mistakes and future fears. Desmond thought of Camille's perfect plans, of his sister's knowing voice, of all the stories he'd hidden behind. "Because you make me want to write my own story," he said simply, "even if I'm not sure how it ends." Mariah's breath caught slightly. She looked down at their notebooks, hers filled with secret gardens, his with uncertain truths. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm not good at letting people help. I'm not good at offering." He smiled slightly. "Maybe we can figure it out together." A doctor walked past, clipboard in hand, reminding them of where they were, of all the real-world complications waiting outside this moment. But when Mariah handed back his notebook, her fingers brushed his deliberately. "Mom likes gardenias," she said. "They mean trust, hopes, and new beginnings. If you're helping with deliveries tomorrow, you should know that." It wasn't a yes, wasn't a promise, but it was a seed planted in fertile ground. Desmond felt something shift inside him, like pages turning to a new chapter. "I'll remember that," he said softly. Above them, clouds parted, letting afternoon sunlight spill across their bench. In its warm glow, Desmond watched Mariah return to her own notebook, adding new lines to an unfinished poem. He didn't try to read them, understanding that some things needed time to grow. Instead, he pulled out his phone, researching gardenias and their care, learning the language she spoke so fluently. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, hospital discharges, flower deliveries, all the complicated mess of real life. But for now, sitting in this garden with their matched notebooks and unspoken possibilities, he felt something he hadn't in years, the quiet joy of being exactly where he was meant to be. Gloria Ellis's homecoming should have been a moment of pure relief. Instead, Mariah felt the tension building as she helped her mother settle into their small apartment, now crowded with medical equipment that beeped and hummed like mechanical intruders. "The oxygen tank goes in the corner," Naya directed, her usual bravado slipping as she obsessively adjusted and readjusted the tubing. "And we need to keep her medication schedule somewhere visible." "Already done." Mariah pointed to the detailed chart she'd created, color-coded and laminated. Organization was her armor, her way of feeling in control when everything else seemed to be slipping through her fingers. Their mother watched them from her favorite armchair, wrapped in the quilt their grandmother had made. "My beautiful girls," she said softly, "always trying to carry the world." A knock at the door made them all turn. Desmond stood in the doorway, holding a modest arrangement of gardenias and lavender. "I hope it's okay," he said, his eyes finding Mariah's. The flowers from the hospital seemed a bit institutional. Mariah felt her chest tighten at the thoughtfulness of the gesture. He'd remembered their conversation about gardenias, had chosen lavender for its calming properties, but before she could respond, Nia stepped forward. "You might as well come in," she said, her tone carrying an edge, "since you're apparently part of all this now." The words hung in the air like frost on petals. Mariah watched her sister's face, recognizing the fear beneath the sharpness. They'd spent so long being each other's only support system that any change felt like a threat. "Nia," their mother's voice was gentle but firm, "help me arrange these beautiful flowers where I can see them from my bed." As Nia helped Gloria to her room, Mariah found herself alone with Desmond for the first time since their garden bench confession. He looked different in her home space, taller somehow, yet less certain. "I should have asked before coming," he said. "I just thought, it's fine." Mariah cut him off, more sharply than she intended. The weight of everything, the medical bills, her mother's fragile health, Nia's obvious disapproval, pressed down on her shoulders. But maybe this isn't the best time. Something flickered in his eyes. Hurt, understanding, resignation. He took a step back, and Mariah felt the distance between them grow like shadows at sunset. "Of course," he said quietly. "I'll handle the morning deliveries tomorrow. Just text me the list." He was halfway to the door when Gloria's voice drifted from the bedroom. "Desmond, would you mind helping me understand these gardening books you've been sharing with my daughter? My eyes aren't what they used to be, but I'd love to hear about urban gardens." Mariah saw the conflict on his face, the desire to stay warring with the fear of overstepping. She found herself nodding slightly, giving permission she wasn't sure she had the right to give. The next hour unfolded like a dream. Desmond sat by her mother's bed, his deep voice bringing the pages to life as he described community gardens sprouting between buildings, flowers blooming in forgotten spaces. Gloria asked thoughtful questions, her eyes bright with interest despite her exhaustion. Nia perched on the windowsill, pretending to scroll through her phone while obviously listening. And Mariah stood in the doorway, watching her carefully constructed walls develop hairline cracks. "You remind me of my late husband," Gloria said suddenly, stopping Desmond mid-sentence. "He was a quiet soul too, but he saw beauty everywhere. Used to write little poems about the weeds growing through sidewalk cracks." The room grew still. They rarely spoke about their father, his absence a carefully tended wound, but Gloria continued, her voice soft with memory. "He taught me that love isn't always loud. Sometimes it's as quiet as seeds taking root, as steady as leaves turning toward light." Mariah felt tears threatening and retreated to the kitchen, needing space to breathe. She heard footsteps behind her, Nia, not Desmond. "You're letting him in," her sister said. It wasn't a question. "I'm not letting anyone anywhere," Mariah snapped, pulling out bills from their organizer with shaking hands. "I'm trying to figure out how to pay for Mom's new medication and keep the flower stand running and make sure you can still—" "And he's helping," Nia interrupted. "That's what scares you, isn't it? That someone besides us might actually care." The truth of it stung like thorns. Mariah looked down at the bills, at the numbers that refused to add up no matter how she arranged them. "We can't depend on anyone else," she said finally. "People leave. Nia, they always do. Dad didn't leave by choice." Nia's voice was unusually gentle. "And not everyone who stays is trying to replace him." From their mother's room, they could hear Desmond reading about butterfly gardens, his voice mixing with Gloria's occasional laughter. It sounded like hope, like possibility, and that was the most terrifying thing of all. Mariah pulled out her notebook, needing to capture this feeling before it overwhelmed her. "We build our walls with careful hands, brick by brick, loss by loss. But sometimes the strongest roots are the ones that crack our foundations, teaching us that growth requires more than walls can hold." "He writes too, you know," Nia said, reading over her shoulder. "I saw his notebook when he was helping at the stand. Different style than yours, but same heart." Before Mariah could respond, a sharp cough from their mother's room shattered the moment. They rushed in to find Gloria reaching for her oxygen mask, Desmond already adjusting the flow rate with careful hands. "I'm okay," Gloria assured them, but her voice was weak. "Just got too excited talking about gardens." Reality crashed back like a wave. This wasn't a story in one of Desmond's books, where love conquered all, and happy endings came with perfect timing. This was real life, with real stakes and real consequences. "You should rest, Mama," Mariah said, her voice steady despite the storm inside. "Desmond needs to go anyway. He has early deliveries tomorrow." She saw the hurt flash across his face again, but this time he didn't try to hide it. He squeezed Gloria's hand gently, nodded to Nia, and walked past Mariah without meeting her eyes. The door clicked shut behind him with quiet finality. Mariah busied herself adjusting her mother's blankets, checking medication schedules, doing anything to avoid the knowing looks from both her sister and her mother. But later that night, as she sat alone with her notebook, she found herself writing not about walls or distance, but about the way certain absences could feel more present than presence itself, about how the hardest thorns to remove were the ones we grew ourselves. Her phone lit up with a message from Desmond. "The gardenias mean what you told me they mean, no matter what." Mariah touched the lotus on her wrist, thinking about beauty growing through mud, about walls that protected and walls that imprisoned, about the difference between letting go and letting in. She didn't reply to his message, but she didn't delete it either. Sometimes she was learning that was its own kind of answer. The morning fog wrapped around Jackson Heights like a gray shawl, turning familiar streets into something strange and distant. Mariah stood at her flower stand, mechanically processing the day's shipment. Each stem was trimmed, sorted, and arranged with precision, but none of the usual joy. It had been 5 days since she'd pushed Desmond away, 5 days of him quietly handling deliveries without stopping to talk, of careful text messages about orders and inventory that felt like speaking through glass. She told herself this was better, cleaner, safer, but her poems said otherwise, filling page after page with thorns and withered petals. Her phone buzzed, not Desmond this time, but the hospital billing department. Another payment was due, and their payment plan application had been denied. The numbers swam before her eyes, too large to comprehend. "You're doing that thing again," Nia's voice cut through her spiral. Her sister stood there in her combat boots and oversized hoodie, holding 2 cups of coffee, rearranging flowers that are already perfect. Mariah looked down at her hands, realizing she'd been mindlessly shifting the same bunch of daisies for several minutes. "Don't you have class?" "Cancelled. Professor's sick." Nia handed her one of the coffees. "Though honestly, I'm starting to think you're the sick one, at least emotionally." "Nia, no, let me finish." Her sister hopped up to sit on the counter, ignoring Mariah's wince at the violation of workspace protocol. "You're doing that thing Dad used to talk about in his letters to Mom. Remember, about how some flowers close up at night, not because they're afraid of the dark, but because they need to protect their nectar." The memory hit like a physical blow. Their father's letters, kept in a box under their mother's bed, were full of such observations. A botanist's love letters to a woman who taught him to see beauty in unlikely places. "This isn't about flowers," Mariah said, but her voice lacked conviction. "No, it's about you being so focused on protecting everyone that you're missing the whole point of having people in your life." Nia swung her legs, her boots tapping against the stand's wooden base. "Did you know Desmond's been helping me with my portfolio?" Mariah's head snapped up. "What?" "Yeah. Turns out publishing people know a lot about design and presentation. He's been giving me feedback, helping me organize my work in a way that tells a story." Nia's voice softened. "He didn't have to do that. Just like he doesn't have to keep showing up here every morning at dawn to handle deliveries so you can check on Mom." Before Mariah could respond, a familiar figure appeared through the fog. Desmond, wearing his usual cardigan and carrying a stack of order forms. He stopped short when he saw Nia, uncertainty flickering across his features. "I can come back," he started, but Nia was already jumping down from the counter. "Nope, I was just leaving. Some of us have real jobs to avoid." She squeezed Mariah's arm as she passed. "Remember what Dad wrote about the night flowers, sis. Even they have to open up eventually." The silence that followed Nia's departure felt heavy with unspoken words. Desmond moved to place the order forms on the counter, careful to maintain the distance Mariah had created. "The Hendersons want white roses for their anniversary," he said, his voice professional, "and Mrs. Rodriguez asked about adding some purple thistle to her usual carnations." "Thistle means endurance," Mariah found herself saying, "and nobility of character." Their eyes met briefly, and she saw something flicker in his, a recognition, a longing, a hurt she'd put there. He looked away first, shuffling through the papers. "There's also a new client," he continued, "a community center on 34th Street. They're interested in weekly deliveries and—" he hesitated. They have a small courtyard they're thinking of turning into a garden. I thought maybe, but I can't. The words came out sharper than intended. I mean, I appreciate you thinking of it, but with Mom's care and the bills, I know about the billing denial, he interrupted quietly. Your sister mentioned it when we were working on her portfolio. Anger flared, hot and protective. That's not your business. No, it's not. His voice remained gentle, which somehow made it worse. But I thought you might want to know that the community center has a grant program. They're looking for local businesses to partner with, especially minority-owned ones. It could provide steady income, plus space for those workshops you talked about wanting to do. The possibility hung in the air like morning mist, tangible but fragile. Mariah looked at her stand, at the flowers she arranged and rearranged like words in her endless unseen poems, at the life she'd built that suddenly felt more like a cage than a shelter. Why are you doing this? She asked finally. Because you're not the only one who speaks through flowers. He placed a single stem on the counter, a purple iris, the same kind she'd used in his first bouquet. And because some stories deserve better endings than fear can write. He turned to go, but paused. Your father was right about the night flowers, you know. I looked it up after Nia mentioned his letters. They close up to protect themselves, but they also do it to conserve energy, so they can bloom again the next day, stronger than before. The fog was starting to lift, sunlight breaking through in gentle beams. Mariah picked up the iris, its petals soft against her fingertips. In her notebook, hidden beneath order forms and bills, she'd written about moments like this. Some distances are measured, not in steps or streets, but in the space between what we fear and what we need. Her phone buzzed again. Another bill. Another reminder of all the reasons to stay safe behind her walls. But as she watched Desmond's retreating figure, she thought about night flowers and morning light, about poems hidden in drawers and gardens waiting to grow in unexpected places. Sometimes, she was learning, the hardest part of blooming wasn't the darkness or the cold or even the fear. It was the simple, terrifying act of deciding to open up anyway. She reached for her phone, fingers hovering over the keys. The community center's grant program could change everything, or it could be another dream that wilted before its time. But maybe that wasn't the point. Maybe the real growth happened in the reaching, in the trying, in the choosing to believe that some risks were worth the thorns they came with. Wait, she called out, her voice carrying through the lifting fog. Desmond turned, hope and hesitation mingled in his stance. Tell me more about the community center. It wasn't a promise or a declaration, but it was a start, like seeds breaking through soil, like poems finally being read, like night flowers opening to meet the dawn, not because they were unafraid, but because they knew that beauty was worth the risk of blooming. The community center's courtyard was smaller than Mariah had imagined, just a modest square of possibility tucked between brick walls. But standing there with the grant application in her hand, she could see it all. Raised beds filled with flowers, workshop spaces where other women could learn to grow their own dreams, a place where beauty could take root and spread. The deadline's Friday, the center's director had said. We'd love to have your proposal. That was 4 days ago. Now, staring at her phone's blank screen, Mariah felt the familiar weight of uncertainty pressing down. Desmond hadn't responded to her text about meeting to discuss the proposal, hadn't shown up for deliveries, hadn't left any explanation. 3 days of silence. Maybe his phone died, Nia suggested, but her voice lacked conviction. She sat cross-legged on their mother's bed, sketching logo designs for Mariah's potential garden project, or he's stuck in a really long meeting. For 3 days, Mariah tried to keep the hurt from her voice as she adjusted their mother's pillows. No one's that busy. Gloria watched her daughter with knowing eyes. Sometimes people carry weights we can't see, she said softly. Like those flowers you told me about, the ones that look delicate but survive the frost. Hellebores, Mariah murmured. Winter roses. She'd been planning to show Desmond how they could include them in the community garden, blooming even in the coldest months. Now they felt like another possibility slipping away. Her phone buzzed. For a moment, hope fluttered, but it was just the hospital's billing department again. The numbers seemed to grow with each notification, like shadows lengthening at sunset. I should focus on what matters, Mariah said, more to herself than her audience. How's the stand, Mom's care, the bills? And that garden proposal that's due in 2 days, Nia interrupted. The one that could help with all of those things. I can't, not without what? Without him. Nia set down her sketchbook. Sis, you're doing that thing again, using one fear to justify another. Before Mariah could respond, her sister's phone chimed. The look that crossed Nia's face made Mariah's chest tighten. What is it? Nia hesitated. It's from Olivia, Desmond's sister. The room seemed to still. Even their mother's ever-present oxygen machine felt quieter. You have his sister's number. She followed my design blog, Nia admitted. We've been talking. She wants you to know that Desmond's okay. Physically, at least. Relief and anger warred in Mariah's chest. If he's okay, then why? His ex-fiancée got engaged. Nia's voice was gentle. It was announced at some big publishing party. Everyone was there. He didn't handle it well. The words hit like winter wind. Mariah thought of Desmond's notebook, of the poems about disappearing into someone else's story, about running from perfect futures because they belonged to someone else's plot. He should have said something, she whispered, like you always do. Nia's question carried no judgment, just understanding. When you're hurting or scared or need help. From her bed, Gloria spoke up. Your father used to disappear into his greenhouse when things got hard. Said he needed to remind himself that even the strongest plants started as fragile seeds. She reached for Mariah's hand, but he always came back. Always brought me whatever bloomed while he was finding his way. Mariah closed her eyes, remembering the way Desmond had looked at her that first morning, asking for flowers that could say what he couldn't, the way he'd slowly learned her language of petals and leaves, adding his own verses to her careful arrangements. Her notebook lay open on her mother's nightstand, filled with half-finished poems about frost and flowers, about the courage it took to bloom in cold seasons, about how some distances weren't measured in miles, but in the space between fear and trust. The grant proposal, she said suddenly. I need to finish it. Now. Nia blinked. But what about? Some stories need to grow their own endings. Mariah squeezed her mother's hand before letting go. Can you help me? With the design part. A slow smile spread across Nia's face. Already working on it. I was thinking, what if we called it Night Bloom Gardens? You know, for all those flowers that close up but always open again. For the first time in 3 days, Mariah felt something like hope stirring. She pulled out her phone, not to check for messages, but to open her notes about hellebores and winter gardens, about beauty that persisted even in frozen soil. The next hours blurred together. Nia's designs evolved on paper, while Mariah's words filled pages, not just about flowers and business plans, but about community and growth and second chances, about creating spaces where people could learn to bloom in their own time, their own way. When midnight came, Gloria insisted on staying awake to help, sharing stories about their father's greenhouse dreams, about love that grew in unlikely places. Even her cough seemed lighter, as if the energy in the room was lifting everyone. You should include a writing corner, their mother suggested, in the garden, a place for poets and dreamers, and a design station, Nia added, for artists who need somewhere to sketch, and winter roses, Mariah said softly, for everyone who needs to believe in blooming through frost. She worked through the night, weaving together practical plans and precious dreams. The proposal took shape like a garden growing in fast motion, budget spreadsheets beside poetic descriptions, architectural drawings next to community impact statements. Dawn found her at the flower stand, arranging the day's flowers with renewed purpose. Each stem felt like a promise, a quiet rebellion against doubt and fear. She placed a single hellebore in the center of each arrangement, a reminder that strength often wore delicate petals. Her phone remained silent, but for the first time in days, the silence felt less like an ending and more like fallow ground, waiting, perhaps, for new seeds to take root. When Mrs. Rodriguez arrived for her carnations, Mariah added a sprig of rosemary to the bunch. For remembrance, she didn't say, for the way some things needed to be held close even when they seemed lost. Something's different, Mrs. Rodriguez said, studying the arrangement. These flowers, they tell a new story. Yes, Mariah agreed, touching the lotus on her wrist. They do, because sometimes, she was learning, the most important blooms weren't the ones that came easily in spring. They were the ones that fought through winter, that opened in darkness, that proved beauty could survive any season, if you were brave enough to keep planting, keep growing, keep believing in the garden hidden beneath the frost. The grant proposal sat finished on the community center director's desk, defending itself with Nia's elegant designs and Mariah's careful words. Now, in the quiet of early morning, Mariah stood at her flower stand, watching frost melt from the petals of her hellebores. The winter roses seemed to glow in the dawn light, their faces turned toward a sun they couldn't yet see. She didn't hear him approach, just felt the shift in the air, like pressure before rain. "Sas, I brought coffee." Desmond's voice was rough, uncertain, and an explanation. "If you'll hear it." Mariah kept her eyes on the flowers, hands steady as she trimmed stems that didn't need trimming. 3 days, she said quietly. 3 days of silence? I know. He set the coffee cups on the counter, careful not to disturb her workspace. I did exactly what I promised myself I wouldn't do. I ran from a story because I was afraid of the ending. Now she looked at him. His cardigan was wrinkled, his hair untamed. Dark circles beneath his eyes suggested sleepless nights spent wrestling with words he couldn't write. "Camille got engaged," she said. Not a question. His breath caught. "Nia told you." Olivia told her. Mariah's hands stilled on the flowers. "Apparently everyone's been talking except you." The hurt in her voice made him flinch. He reached into his messenger bag, pulling out a worn notebook. Not his usual one, but older, its pages swollen with use. "I want to show you something," he said. "It's not pretty or poetic. It's not even finished, but it's true." Mariah hesitated, then nodded. He opened the notebook, pages crackling with age and memory. "I started writing this the day I left Camille," he began. 2 weeks before our wedding. Everyone had a role picked out for me. Junior literary agent, suburban husband, man who had his life together. The perfect character in someone else's story. His fingers trembled slightly as he turned pages filled with cramped handwriting. "I ran because I was drowning in expectations, because I couldn't bear to disappoint everyone by being less than they imagined, less than perfect." He swallowed hard. "When I heard about her engagement, it wasn't jealousy I felt. It was shame, because she found someone brave enough to be who she needed, while I'm still learning how to be real." Mariah thought of her own hidden poems, of words she'd never shown anyone until him. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you have real problems, your mother's health, the bills, the stand. My emotional chaos felt selfish in comparison." "That's not—" She stopped, recognizing her own logic reflected back at her. How many times had she dismissed her own needs as less important than her family's? How many times had she chosen silence over vulnerability? A customer approached the stand. Mariah moved automatically to help, but Desmond was already there, greeting Mrs. Rodriguez with quiet familiarity. He knew exactly which carnations she preferred, added the sprig of rosemary that had become tradition. Watching him work, Mariah saw what she'd been missing. How he'd learned not just the flowers, but the stories behind them. How he'd carved out his own place in her carefully ordered world. After Mrs. Rodriguez left, Mariah reached for her own notebook. "I want to show you something too." She opened to the pages she'd filled during his absence, poems about winter gardens and frost-hardy blooms, about beauty that persisted even when unseen, about the courage it took to grow through difficult seasons. "I finished the grant proposal," she said, "for night bloom gardens." His eyes widened. "Without me. Because of you." She touched the lotus on her wrist. "You showed me that sometimes the stories we're afraid to tell become the ones that matter most." She handed him the sample designs Nia had created, a garden space with corners for writers and artists, beds of flowers chosen for their resilience and meaning. Hellebores and night-blooming jasmine, moonflowers and evening primrose. "It's a place for people who need to bloom on their own schedule," she explained, "who need to believe that beauty doesn't always follow expected patterns." Desmond studied the designs, his expression softening. Like a literary agency reader who'd rather arrange flowers than climb corporate ladders. Like a florist who writes secret poems, she countered. Or a teenage artist who thinks she has to choose between family and dreams. He set the designs down carefully. "I should have trusted you with my chaos." "I should have trusted you with mine." Mariah smiled slightly. We're both works in progress. The morning sun had fully risen now, turning frost into diamonds on the flower petals. A breeze carried the promise of change, of spring waiting beneath winter's surface. "Read me something," she said suddenly. "Joined from your old notebook, the unfinished, unpolished truth." He hesitated only briefly before finding a page. "I am learning to live in drafts, in stories without perfect endings, in gardens that grow through concrete, in love that doesn't follow plots." "Your turn," he said softly. Mariah opened her notebook to her latest poem. Some flowers bloom in darkness, some hearts learn trust in frost, some stories find their truth in chapters almost lost. Their eyes met over the shared words, over the space between fear and possibility. Somewhere in the city, a grant proposal waited to be read. In an apartment across town, a mother and sister conspired and hoped. And here, in this moment, two people chose to believe in stories still being written. "Dice, help me with the deliveries," Mariah asked. "There's a new arrangement I've been working on, something about second chances and winter blooms." "Tell me about it," Desmond said, falling into step beside her. "I'm learning that the best stories are the ones we grow together." They worked through the morning, hands moving among flowers that had survived the frost. Each stem they touched was a word in their shared language, each bloom a promise that growth happened in its own time, in its own way. And if some of their arrangements carried extra meaning that day, hope tucked between hellebores, courage wrapped in winter roses, well, that was just another chapter in a story still unfurling, like petals opening to unexpected light. The community center's decision arrived on a Tuesday morning, carried in an envelope too thin to contain so many dreams. Mariah stood in her small kitchen, letter unopened in her trembling hands, while Nia paced and their mother watched from her favorite chair. "Just open it," Nia urged, her own portfolio interview results temporarily forgotten in the face of her sister's anxiety. "So whatever it says, we'll figure it out." Mariah touched the lotus on her wrist, a habit that had become more comfort than nervous tick. The past week had been a slow dance of restoration, Desmond returning to his place in their daily rhythm, trust rebuilding like spring after winter. He'd offered to be here for this moment, but she'd needed to face it with her family first. The envelope tore easily, its contents spilling out like scattered petals. "Dear Ms. Ellie," she read aloud, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "We are pleased to inform you." Nia's squeal drowned out the rest. She launched herself at Mariah, nearly knocking them both into the refrigerator. Their mother's laugh, warm and clear and blessedly free of coughing, filled the small kitchen. "Read the rest," Gloria insisted, her eyes bright with pride. Mariah continued, each word making the impossible feel more real. The grant would cover initial renovations of the courtyard. The community center would provide space for workshops and a small retail area for flower sales. They wanted Night Bloom Gardens to be operational within 3 months. 3 months? Nia's eyes widened. "That's like really soon. Too soon." Their mother's question was gentle but pointed. Mariah looked around their kitchen, at the careful system they'd developed for managing medications and appointments, at the calendar marked with payment due dates and delivery schedules. "I don't know," she admitted. "The stand is stable, safe. This is everything you've been working for," Nia finished. "Everything Dad used to talk about. Flowers as a way to build community, to help people grow their own beauty." The mention of their father made Mariah's chest tighten. She walked to her mother's room, returning with the box of his letters. Inside, beneath years of careful observations about plants and love and perseverance, lay a folded piece of paper she'd read so many times, the creases were soft as silk. "So my dearest Gloria," and she read, though they all knew the words by heart. "Today I watched a seed break through concrete, reaching for light against all logic and reason. It reminded me that the most beautiful gardens often grow in unexpected places, nurtured by unexpected hands." Her phone buzzed. "Desmond, right on schedule. No pressure," his message read, "but there's a woman at the stand asking about workshop registration. Apparently word's getting out." Something shifted in Mariah's chest like roots finding fertile soil. "I need to make some calls," she said, "to the medical billing office, to the flower suppliers. If we're doing this, we need a real plan. Already working on it." Nia pulled out her tablet, revealing spreadsheets and schedules. Been designing some options for managing both locations. And before you freak out, Mum's care is built into everything. Plus, I may have talked to Desmond about flexible delivery schedules. You've been planning this behind my back, more like preparing for possibility. Nia's grin was unrepentant. Someone once told me that the best gardens start with good groundwork. Their mother reached for the letter, running her fingers over the official letterhead. Your father would love this, she said softly. Not just the garden, but watching his daughters grow into their own light. Mariah's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a photo from Desmond. A simple arrangement of hellebores and early spring buds, with a card that read, "Congratulations," in his careful handwriting. The question mark made her smile, so perfectly him in its gentle uncertainty. She found herself reaching for her notebook, needing to capture this moment of transition. We plant our fears like seeds, watch them grow into courage, learn that every garden begins with trembling hands and hopeful hearts. The woman asking about workshops, Mariah said, already reaching for her coat. Did Desmond happen to mention what kind she's interested in? Nia's smile widened. Apparently she's a writer, wants to learn about flower symbolism for her novels. Said something about stories blooming in unexpected ways. The synchronicity of it felt like a sign, like their father's concrete-breaking seed finding its moment to grow. Mom, Mariah turned to Gloria. You okay if I go handle this? More than okay. Her mother's eyes shone. Just bring me back something pretty. Maybe those blue flowers Desmond's so fond of. The walk to the stand felt different somehow, as if the very sidewalk had shifted beneath her feet. She found Desmond deep in conversation with a woman clutching a well-worn notebook, his expression animated as he explained the meaning behind different blooms. Hellebores, he was saying, remind us that beauty doesn't always follow expected seasons. And sometimes, Mariah added, stepping into their conversation, the most important growth happens when we're brave enough to break new ground. The woman turned, her face lighting up. You must be Mariah. Your partner here was just telling me about your workshops, about creating space for people to find their own ways of blooming. Partner. The word settled over Mariah like morning dew, unexpected, but somehow right. We're still working out the details, she said, meeting Desmond's eyes over the flowers. But I think it's time to start turning possibilities into plans. Later, after the woman had left with her notebook full of flower meanings and workshop dates, Mariah showed Desmond the letter. He read it carefully, his smile growing with each line. So, he said finally, ready to grow something new? She looked at their shared space, the stand that had been her safe harbor, the flowers they'd learned to tend together, the future sprouting like seeds after rain. Not alone, she answered, and watched joy bloom across his face like sunrise. They spent the rest of the morning planning and dreaming, their notebooks open side by side. Between customers, they sketched layouts for the new space, brainstormed workshop ideas, wove poetry and practicality together like flowers in a bouquet. And if their hands brushed more often than necessary, if their shared smiles carried the warmth of new seasons, well, that was just another kind of growth, another way of learning to bloom. Spring arrived in Jackson Heights like a watercolor painting, each day adding new shades to the awakening world. In the community center's courtyard, Night Bloom Gardens was taking shape, raised beds filled with carefully chosen flowers, benches placed for writers and dreamers, a small greenhouse that echoed with possibility. Mariah stood in the morning light, reviewing her checklist for the day's opening ceremony. The flower stand still operated on its corner, but now it served as a satellite to this growing dream, a reminder of where everything began. The writing corner needs more light, Desmond said, adjusting the angle of a desk near the eastern wall. His cardigan was smudged with dirt, his notebook peeking out of his back pocket. Want the poets to see their words clearly. Speaking of words, Nia emerged from the greenhouse, carrying a framed piece of paper. Mom wanted this displayed before people arrive. Mariah's breath caught. It was one of their father's letters, the one about concrete-breaking seeds, professionally matted and framed alongside pressed flowers from his old greenhouse. Gloria had insisted it belong in the new space, a bridge between past dreams and present growth. Perfect timing, a familiar voice called. They turned to see their mother actually walking, through the garden gate, supported by her new wheeled oxygen tank. Her improved treatment plan was working, each day bringing more strength, more breath, more life. "Mama, you didn't have to come early," Mariah started, but Gloria waved her off. "And miss seeing my girls prepare for their big moment." "Never." She settled onto one of the benches, touching the early blooming hellebores with gentle fingers. "Your father would be so proud of this place." Nia perched next to her, tablet in hand. "Wait till you see the website traffic. We've got workshop registrations from all over Queens. Turns out a lot of people want to learn about flowers and poetry and finding beauty in unexpected places." "Speaking of unexpected," Desmond said, reaching into his messenger bag, "I have something for the opening." He pulled out a small book bound in soft green cloth. Mariah recognized her own handwriting on the cover. "Night Blooms. Poetry from the Garden." "You didn't," she whispered. "We did," Nia corrected, grinning. "Desmond handled the publishing contacts. I did the design, and Mom chose which poems to include." She paused. "Well, the ones you let us read, anyway." Mariah's fingers trembled as she opened the book. Inside were her garden poems, arranged like flowers in a bouquet, each one capturing moments of growth and change, fear and courage, love blooming through every season. "It's just a small printing," Desmond said quickly. "Say for workshop participants and the writing corner, but the publisher's interested in a full collection when you're ready." Before Mariah could respond, the garden gate opened again. Mrs. Rodriguez entered, carrying her weekly carnations and a notebook of her own. Behind her came the sunflower lawyer, then the woman who'd asked about writing workshops, then more faces, some familiar from the flower stand, others new to their growing community. "There's it time?" Gloria asked, eyes bright with pride. Mariah looked around at the space they'd created together, at Nia setting up her design station where she'd teach others to capture beauty in lines and colors, at Desmond arranging books and notebooks in the writing corner, making space for stories yet to bloom, at her mother, surrounded by flowers her father would have loved. "Almost," she said. "Fun one last thing." She slipped into the greenhouse, returning with a tray of tiny plants and lotus seedlings, just beginning to stretch toward light. "For new beginnings," she explained, placing them near the entrance. "For everyone who needs to believe in beauty, growing through difficult seasons." The morning sun caught the lotus on her wrist, matching the sparkle in Desmond's eyes as he watched her work. They'd grown too these past months, learning to trust in slow love, in imperfect progress, in stories that wrote themselves in unexpected ways. "Ready now?" he asked softly. Mariah reached for her notebook one last time, needing to capture this moment before sharing their space with the world. "We are all gardens growing through seasons of doubt and bloom, learning that love, like flowers, takes root in its own sweet time, flourishing not in spite of, but because of what we overcome, the garden filled with morning light and quiet conversation." Gloria began telling stories about her husband's greenhouse dreams, while Nia showed visitors her designs for future workshops. Desmond moved among the writers' corners, answering questions about journaling and flower symbolism, and Mariah stood in the center of it all, watching life unfold like petals after rain. The flower stand would always be her first love, her safe harbor. But here, in this space between dreams and reality, she was learning that the most beautiful gardens were the ones you grew together. "Time to open the gates," Desmond asked, returning to her side. She took his hand, feeling the warmth of shared dreams and patient love. Time to bloom. The gates opened wide, welcoming queens to their garden of night flowers and new beginnings. And if some of the hellebores were arranged in perfect circles, if certain blue flowers had places of honor near the writing desks, if love grew like poetry between the lines of their careful plans, well, that was just another kind of perennial beauty, blooming season after season in its own perfect time. 1 year later, the autumn evening wrapped around night bloom gardens like a soft shawl, fairy lights twinkling among the late-blooming flowers. The space had evolved over the seasons, each month adding new growth to their shared dream. Tonight, the courtyard was filled with quiet conversation and gentle music as their community gathered to celebrate the garden's first anniversary. Mariah stood near the greenhouse, watching Nia guide a group of young artists through a session on botanical illustration. Her sister's design business had flourished alongside the garden, her work now featured in local galleries and community spaces across Queens. "Your mother's holding court again," Desmond said, appearing at her side with 2 cups of tea. "This time she's telling the story about your father's midnight gardening experiments." Mariah smiled, accepting the tea. Gloria's health had stabilized, allowing her to become the garden's unofficial historian. She loved sharing stories with workshop participants. Her oxygen tank now more companion than burden. The original flower stand still operated on its corner, but it had become something different, a starting point rather than a safe harbor. New flowers, new arrangements, new stories blooming every day. "Look what I found," Desmond said, pulling a worn book from his messenger bag, the first copy of Night Blooms, its green cover softened by countless readings. Someone left a note inside. Mariah opened to the marked page, finding a handwritten message from a workshop participant. "Thank you for teaching me that words, like flowers, can grow through any season. My first poetry collection comes out next month." "That's the 3rd one this year," she said softly. 3 new books born in our garden." "Speaking of books," Desmond's voice held a hint of excitement. "The publishing house loved your new manuscript, Gardens in Concrete, Growing Beauty in Unexpected Places. They want to release it in spring." Mariah touched the lotus on her wrist, the familiar gesture now more celebration than comfort. So much had grown in this space, not just flowers and poetry, but confidence, community, love that flourished like perennials returning season after season. Near the writing corner, Mrs. Rodriguez was sharing her own stories now, telling new visitors about the first days of the flower stand. The sunflower lawyer had started a pro bono program helping other small businesses navigate grant applications. Even Olivia, Desmond's sister, had become part of their expanding family, offering literary workshops alongside the gardening classes. "Sometimes I wonder," Mariah said, watching their community mingle and grow, "what Dad would think of all this. I think he'd say what he wrote in that last letter." Gloria's voice came from behind them. She moved with quiet confidence now, her breathing easier in the cool evening air. "The most beautiful gardens are the ones we grow together, where every flower adds its own verse to the story." Nia joined them, her hands smudged with artistic evidence. "We should take a picture," she suggested, "for the 2nd edition of Night Blooms." They gathered near the lotus pond, family by blood and choice, surrounded by the flowers they'd grown together. As Nia set up the camera timer, Mariah looked around at their garden of second chances and new beginnings. Here was Desmond, no longer hiding behind others' expectations, but writing his own story beside hers. Here was Nia, her art blooming as brilliantly as any flower. Here was their mother, stronger every day, carrying their father's dreams forward. And here was Mariah herself, learning that the most beautiful growth happened not in careful isolation, but in the messy, wonderful tangle of shared lives and open hearts. The camera flashed, capturing the moment, not an ending, but another beginning. In the greenhouse, next season's seedlings were already stretching toward light. In their notebooks, new poems waited to be written. In the garden beds, tomorrow's flowers prepared to bloom. Life would bring more seasons, more challenges, more chances to grow. But now they knew the truth their father had tried to teach them, that love, like flowers, thrived not in perfect conditions, but in persistent hope, in daily tending, in the courage to keep planting even when winter seemed endless. As the celebration continued around them, Desmond took Mariah's hand. "Ready for the next chapter," she smiled, feeling the future unfold like petals in morning light. "Always." Above them, stars emerged like silver flowers in the night sky. The garden glowed with possibility, with stories still being written, with beauty that grew stronger with each passing season. Some dreams, they had learned, were meant to be shared. Some gardens were meant to grow forever. Some love, like the most resilient blooms, only grew stronger with time, not despite life's challenges, but because of the courage it took to face them together. In the greenhouse, the newest generation of lotus flowers prepared to bloom, each one carrying the promise of beauty yet to come. Their garden would keep growing, keep changing, Keep offering space for others to bloom in their own time. And that, perhaps, was the most beautiful story of all. The end. Based on Mariah and Desmond's journey in Flowers on the Corner, I'd like to ask a deep question for reflection. In the story, Mariah had to choose between staying in her safety zone with the flower stand or taking a risk by opening her heart and her garden to new possibilities. What about you? Have you ever experienced a moment when you had to choose between the security of the known and the risk of a bigger dream? How did you deal with this moment of decision in your life? Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.